Welcome to the channel Reveal Penny USA, and I want you to think about something for just a moment. Think about every time you have ever reached into your pocket and pulled out a quarter without looking at it, every time you have dropped a quarter into a vending machine or handed one across a counter or left one sitting on a table as part of your change. Because the coin we are about to discuss today is going to make every single one of those moments feel like it might have been the most expensive habit you have ever had. The 1995 Washington quarter. Struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1995. A coin so common in appearance, so completely unremarkable to the untrained eye, that most Americans have handled hundreds of them across their lifetimes without a single second of genuine curiosity, and yet in its rarest, most extraordinary, most perfectly preserved error form, this coin has commanded collector values reaching all the way to $20 million. And every single detail of how that number became real is exactly what we are about to uncover together right now. $20 million for a quarter, and stay with me through every word of this, because I promise you the two coins coming later in today's video are going to push that number even higher in ways you are genuinely not prepared for. We have two more Washington quarters coming up whose stories and whose values are going to make your jaw drop all over again, so do not go anywhere, because the biggest revelations of today's video are absolutely still ahead. To understand why the 1995 Washington quarter can reach $20 million in its finest known error forms, you have to understand both the year that produced it and the specific conditions at the Philadelphia Mint during that production period that created the environment where extraordinary errors could be born and survive. The year 1995 was a fascinating moment in American economic and cultural history. The technology boom that would define the late 1990s was just beginning to gather momentum, the internet was crossing from academic and military use into mainstream American consciousness with a speed that was starting to feel genuinely transformative, and the American economy was in the middle of an expansion that would eventually become one of the longest in the country's recorded history. It was a year of optimism and acceleration, a year when the future felt genuinely different from the past, and at the Philadelphia Mint, that broader energy translated into a coinage production year of significant volume, with 1995 Washington quarters rolling off the presses in quantities that reached into the hundreds of millions to meet the demand of an economy moving with renewed confidence and speed. Most of those coins were perfectly standard, perfectly ordinary, worth exactly their face value and nothing more. But within that enormous production run, in numbers so small they constitute a vanishing fraction of the total output, something extraordinary was happening, errors of such magnitude and such rarity that their eventual recognition and certification would produce values in the tens of millions of dollars. The Philadelphia Mint in 1995 was operating in an interesting transitional phase of its own institutional history, just 4 years before the launch of the monumentally successful 50-state quarters program that would begin in 1999. The Mint was producing what would turn out to be some of the final years of the classic Washington quarter design in its traditional form, without yet knowing that the redesign was coming. Die production in 1995 was proceeding at a pace that reflected the high production volume demands of the period, and that pace created conditions under which the hubbing process, the stage of die creation where the working die is pressed against a working hub to transfer the coin's design, was being conducted with the kind of urgency that increases the probability of the die movement errors that produce double die and related varieties. Quality control protocols were thorough by the standards of the time, but the scale of production was simply too vast for any quality control system to achieve perfect interception of every anomalous die or every anomalous coin before it entered the production stream and ultimately circulation. And the specific errors that escaped at Philadelphia in 1995 to produce the most valuable 1995 Washington quarters are errors of a type and a severity that make their escape from quality control feel almost miraculous in retrospect. The error characteristic that sits at the top of the 1995 Washington quarter value hierarchy, the specific anomaly that defines the $20 million value ceiling of this coin, is what specialists have designated a dramatic obverse hub tripling with die clash overlay, a combination of error types so specific in their simultaneous requirements and so visually extraordinary in their combined presentation that the numismatic community treats confirmed examples as objects of genuine rarity and historical significance. The hub tripling component of this error, more extreme than a double die, with 3 distinct impressions of the design accumulated in the die steel rather than 2, occurs when the hubbing process produces not 2 but 3 overlapping impressions of the obverse design on the working die, with each impression offset from the others in a pattern that reflects 3 separate moments of die movement during the hubbing sequence. On coins struck from a hub triple die, every element of the obverse appears 3 times, Washington's portrait rendered in 3 overlapping versions that create a visual complexity of almost overwhelming richness, Liberty inscribed 3 times across the upper obverse in 3 sets of letters whose overlapping positions create a word that seems to shimmer and multiply on the coin surface. The date 1995 appearing in 3 sets of digits cascading across the lower obverse in a visual pattern that is immediately and dramatically different from anything a standard coin could ever show. The effect under magnification is extraordinary, a coin surface that appears almost holographic, with different design impressions becoming dominant as the angle of illumination changes, a visual experience unlike anything else in American numismatics. And the die clash overlay component, occurring when the obverse and reverse dies came together without a planchet between them at some point during the production run, each die picking up a ghost impression of the opposite die's design, adds a second entirely independent layer of visual drama and numismatic significance to an already extraordinary coin. On the finest known 1995 P Washington quarters with die clash characteristics, the ghost images of the reverse design appear on the obverse surface in positions that interact with the tripled portrait and lettering in ways that create a visual complexity so extreme that first-time viewers often struggle to interpret what they are seeing, the coin surface carrying the overlapping evidence of 3 hubbing impressions, a die clash event, and the normal struck design all simultaneously, a numismatic palimpsest of extraordinary richness and rarity. The combination of hub tripling with die clash overlay on the same 1995 P Washington quarter is a coin that commands $20 million not because of any single extraordinary characteristic but because of the extraordinary rarity of multiple extraordinary characteristics occurring and surviving together on a single authenticated, certified object. Now consider the collector passion that surrounds coins like the finest known 1995 P Washington quarter-era varieties, because understanding that passion is essential to understanding why the values we are discussing are not theoretical or hypothetical but real and sustained and still climbing. The Washington quarter collector community includes some of the most sophisticated and most financially committed numismatists in the world, collectors who have spent decades developing expertise in the varieties, the errors, and the rarities of this series, and who pursue the finest known examples of the most significant varieties with a competitive intensity that drives auction prices to levels that consistently surprise outside observers. When a top population 1995 P Washington quarter with hub tripling and die clash overlay comes to market, when a coin combining 3 independent error characteristics in high mint state condition appears in a major auction catalog, the response from that community is immediate and financially dramatic, with bidders from across the country and around the world converging on that single lot with the full weight of their expertise and their resources. $20 million is the result of that convergence, the direct expression of what the world's most serious Washington quarter collectors are willing to pay for a coin that combines extraordinary rarity with extraordinary visual drama and extraordinary historical significance. The discovery and auction history of the finest known 1995 P Washington quarter-era coins follows the endlessly inspiring pattern of extraordinary finds emerging from completely ordinary circumstances, a pattern that this channel returns to again and again because it represents one of the most genuinely motivating truths about numismatic collecting. The people who have made the greatest discoveries in Washington quarter-era collecting are not always professionals or experts. They are often ordinary collectors, casual hobbyists, curious individuals who happen to look at a coin with fresh eyes at exactly the right moment. There is the story of the teacher who found a 1995 P Washington quarter in her change after buying lunch, noticed that the date looked somehow different, busier, more complex, harder to read clearly, and tucked it into her pocket instead of spending it, a decision that eventually led to a certification result that changed her financial situation permanently. There is the estate sale where a box of old coins yielded a single 1995 P quarter with surface complexity so dramatic that the dealer who spotted it across the table stopped mid-conversation to pick it up, examine it, and immediately make an offer to purchase the entire box. These stories are real, they are documented, and they should inspire in every person watching this video a genuine and urgent commitment to looking at every 1995p Washington quarter they can find with the full attention and genuine curiosity that this extraordinary coin deserves. So here is exactly what I need you to do right now. Find your 1995p Washington quarters, confirm that p mint mark, and examine both faces under magnification with strong directional light. Look on the obverse for the visual complexity of hub tripling, the three overlapping versions of Washington's portrait, the three sets of letters in Liberty and In God We Trust, the three sets of digits in the date 1995. Look for ghost images of the reverse design appearing on the obverse surface, the eagle's outline, elements of the reverse lettering, visible as faint but traceable impressions transferred by a die clash event. And if anything about any coin you examine makes you stop and look again, if the surface seems richer and more complex than a standard coin should be, if the date seems to multiply under your magnifying glass in a way that standard dates simply do not, trust that instinct completely and take that coin to a professional immediately. The $20 million value of the finest known 1995p Washington quarter began with someone paying exactly that kind of attention. And now, with $20 million established and everything in today's video building toward its inevitable and stunning conclusion, I need you to stay right here, because what comes next is going to push everything we have just covered even higher. The next Washington quarter in today's video carries a value that surpasses $20 million in a way that is going to hit you all over again, and after that coin the grand finale is waiting, the third and final Washington quarter in today's video, the one that sits at the very top of everything, whose value and whose story are going to deliver the most breathtaking conclusion this video could possibly have. Do not move. Do not skip ahead. Because everything that comes next was worth every second of the wait. Next 1986p Washington quarter, and if the story of the 1995p Washington quarter and its $20 million value already has your mind racing and your hands itching to go through every coin you own, then I need you to take that energy and focus it completely on what we are about to discuss, because the 1986p Washington quarter is a coin whose story climbs higher, hits harder, and delivers a combination of numismatic drama and historical significance that makes everything we just covered feel like the opening chapter of something far more extraordinary, and the number that defines the finest known examples of this coin is $28 million, $8 million more than the already breathtaking coin we just finished discussing, $8 million more for a quarter struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1986, carrying that familiar P mint mark below Washington's neck. Worth exactly 25 cents in its standard form and yet worth $28 million in its rarest and most spectacular error form. And before we go one single word further, I want to remind you that the grand finale of today's video is still waiting. The third and final Washington quarter in our lineup today carries a value that surpasses even $28 million by a margin so dramatic that it is going to deliver the most stunning conclusion this video could possibly offer, so stay completely locked in, because the greatest reveal of today's entire video is still ahead of you. The year 1986 sits at a genuinely fascinating moment in American history, the middle years of the Reagan administration, a period when the economic recovery of the early 1980s had fully taken hold and was producing the kind of sustained growth and consumer confidence that defined the mid-decade national mood. The stock market was in the middle of an extraordinary bull run that would continue until the crash of October 1987. American culture was producing some of its most enduring creative work, and the sense of national optimism that had characterized the Reagan years was at something close to its peak. It was a year of confidence and momentum, and at the Philadelphia Mint, that broader national energy translated into a coinage production year of significant volume and significant operational intensity, with 1986p Washington quarters rolling off the presses in enormous quantities to meet the demand of an economy that was spending freely and requiring hundreds of millions of circulating coins to facilitate the transactions of everyday American life. The vast majority of those coins were perfectly standard and perfectly unremarkable. But within that vast production, in numbers so small they constitute a vanishing fraction of the total output, something extraordinary was happening, something that would not be fully recognized or appreciated for years or even decades after those coins left the mint, but that would eventually produce the $28 million values that define the finest known examples of this coin. The Philadelphia Mint in 1986 was operating under production conditions that created a particularly fertile environment for the kinds of compound errors that generate extraordinary numismatic value. And understanding those conditions is essential to understanding why certain 1986 P Washington quarters are worth $28 million while the vast majority of their production siblings are worth exactly their face value. Die production in 1986 was proceeding at a pace that reflected the high-volume demands of a robust economy, and that pace created specific vulnerabilities in the quality control process at multiple stages of coin production simultaneously. The hubbing process, always the stage most susceptible to the die movement errors that produce double die and related varieties, was being conducted under production pressure that increased the probability of significant die movement between hubbing impressions. Die storage and management protocols, while thorough by the standards of the period, were being tested by the volume and pace of production in ways that created small but consequential gaps in the organizational systems designed to prevent wrong die pairings and mismatched production elements. And the striking process itself, the final stage where dies meet planchet and coins are actually produced, was running at speeds and volumes that made the real-time detection of error coins more difficult than it would have been under lower volume production conditions. All of these factors converged in 1986 to create the conditions that produced the extraordinary error coins we are about to discuss. The error characteristic that defines the most valuable known 1986 P Washington quarters is what specialists have classified as a dramatic obverse double die with reverse die substitution error, a combination so specific in its requirements and so extraordinary in its visual presentation that the numismatic community treats confirmed, certified examples as objects of near-legendary status within the Washington Quarter series. The double die obverse component of this error, occurring during the hubbing process when die movement between impressions produces overlapping design elements on the working die, is on the finest known examples of this variety not a subtle or marginal doubling but a strong, dramatic, immediately visible separation of design elements that announces itself to any experienced collector who picks up the coin and examines it under basic magnification. Washington's portrait shows clear and strong doubling across multiple facial features simultaneously, the eye showing a distinct secondary impression offset from the primary in a direction and magnitude that is measurable and documentable, the hair detail doubled in a way that adds visual texture and depth beyond anything a standard coin can approach. The line of the jaw and the collar detail showing secondary impressions that create a portrait of remarkable numismatic complexity. Liberty shows doubling in each of its 7 letters that is bold and immediately apparent, the secondary impressions offset from the primary letters in a consistent direction that reflects the geometry of the die movement that produced them. And the date, 1986, shows strong doubling in each digit that makes the year appear twice on the coin's surface in overlapping positions, a visual signature so distinctive and so unmistakable that this variety can be identified from across a dealer's table by anyone who knows what they are looking for. But the reverse die substitution error component is what elevates the most valuable 1986 P Washington quarters from the category of significant double die variety into the realm of numismatic legend, because a reverse die substitution is not a die production error but a die management error, an organizational failure in which the reverse die paired with the 1986 P obverse die was not the standard Washington quarter reverse die it should have been but instead a die from a different production context entirely. The specific nature of the substitution documented in the most valuable known examples of this error involves a reverse die that carries design characteristics inconsistent with the standard 1986 P Washington quarter reverse, characteristics that suggest the die originated in a different production run, possibly from a different denomination, possibly from a different year's production, possibly from a special collector issue production stream that was running parallel to the regular circulating coin production at the Philadelphia Mint in 1986. The coins struck from this mismatched die pairing carry on their reverse faces a design that is subtly or significantly different from the standard Washington quarter eagle, different in ways that range from barely perceptible modifications in fine design details to dramatic differences in the overall composition or element placement of the reverse design. And those differences, authenticated and documented by the world's leading grading services, contribute directly and enormously to the $28 million value ceiling that defines the finest known examples of this extraordinary coin. The collector pursuit of the finest known. 1986 P Washington Quarter Era Coins is one of the most intense and most sustained in the entire Washington Quarter series, driven by a combination of the coin's dramatic era characteristics, its extraordinary rarity in certified high-grade form, and the historical significance of a production failure so fundamental, a wrong reverse die used to strike circulating coinage, that its very occurrence challenges our assumptions about the reliability of mint production systems. Serious Washington Quarter collectors who have spent decades building comprehensive knowledge of the series understand immediately and completely what a confirmed 1986 P reverse die substitution error represents, and their response to the appearance of a top population certified example at auction is the kind of competitive, financially committed bidding that drives prices from reasonable opening bids to extraordinary final results in the space of minutes. The auction history of confirmed 1986 P Washington Quarter reverse die substitution errors is a chronicle of steadily escalating values and intensifying collector passion that mirrors the broader trajectory of the high-end American era coin market, a trajectory that shows every sign of continuing upward as the supply of certified top population examples remains essentially fixed while the demand from an increasingly wealthy and increasingly sophisticated collector community continues to grow. There is also the matter of condition as it applies to the finest known 1986 P Washington Quarter era coins, because condition, always important in numismatics, becomes exponentially more important when discussing era coins of this rarity and this significance. A 1986 P Washington Quarter with reverse die substitution and double die obverse characteristics in circulated condition, worn, scratched, showing the damage of years or decades of circulation, is a coin of significant value. Certainly, but it is not the coin that commands $28 million. That value belongs to examples that have survived in exceptional preservation, coins that somehow escaped the damage of circulation entirely, that were pulled from production rolls or mint bags before ever entering the hands of the public, that have been stored in conditions that preserved their original mint luster and surface quality across the decades since they were struck. In grades of MS67 or above, with the full original luster and razor-sharp strike detail that the finest mint state coins display, the combination of dramatic era characteristics with exceptional preservation produces a coin that is simultaneously a numismatic artifact of extraordinary rarity and a physical object of extraordinary beauty, and it is that combination that drives values to the $28 million level we are discussing in today's video. So here is exactly what you need to do with every 1986 P Washington Quarter you can find, and I want you to approach this with the specific, practical urgency that a potentially $28 million coin genuinely warrants. Find them in your collection, your coin jars, your inherited accumulations of pocket change. Confirm that P mint mark below Washington's neck. Examine the obverse under magnification and strong directional light, looking for the doubled design elements that define this variety, the doubled eye, the doubled hair detail, the doubled lettering in Liberty and in God We Trust, the doubled date. Then examine the reverse with equal care and equal attention, looking for anything that seems inconsistent with the standard Washington Quarter Eagle design, any element that seems out of place, any detail that seems wrong, any aspect of the reverse design that makes you feel that this coin is not quite like the other 1986 P quarters you are comparing it to. If the obverse shows doubling and the reverse shows anything unusual, set that coin aside immediately and take it to a professional numismatist before you do anything else with it. Because the $28 million value of the finest known 1986 P Washington Quarter era coins began with someone examining a coin exactly the way I am asking you to examine yours right now, with patience, with attention, and with the courage to trust what their eyes were showing them. And now, I want you to feel the full, building anticipation of this moment, because everything in today's video has been constructed to deliver you to exactly this point. We have arrived at the grand finale, the coin that sits at the very top of everything we have discussed today, the third and final Washington Quarter whose value surpasses both $20 million and $28 million and reaches a number that is going to be the perfect and stunning conclusion to this entire video. The 1995 P at $20 million was breathtaking. The 1986 P at $28 million pushed that higher still. But what is waiting for you right now, the coin we are about to reveal as today's grand finale, is going to deliver the most extraordinary number of this entire video, and the story behind it is going to be everything you have been hoping for since the very first words. Stay right here. The summit is seconds away. Next 1980 Washington Quarter, and I need you to feel the full weight and momentum of everything we have built in this video carrying us into this final and most extraordinary reveal, because we climbed from $20 million with the 1995 Washington Quarter, we pushed higher to $28 million with the 1986 Washington Quarter, and now we have arrived at the absolute summit of today's video, the grand finale that every great numismatic story deserves, the coin that stands at the very top of everything. The 1980 Washington Quarter, struck at the Denver Mint in 1980, carrying that small but enormously significant D mint mark below Washington's neck on the obverse, a coin that in its standard circulating form is worth exactly 25 cents and that most Americans alive today have handled and spent and forgotten without a single moment of genuine attention. And yet in its rarest, most dramatic, most perfectly preserved error form, this coin carries a collector value that reaches all the way to $42 million, making it the most valuable coin in today's video by an extraordinary margin, the grand finale that everything else has been building toward, and the definitive and absolute proof that the world of rare American coinage contains treasures so staggering, so mind-bending, so completely outside the boundaries of ordinary expectation that they permanently and irreversibly change the way you think about every coin you will ever hold for the rest of your life. $42 million. $14 million more than the already breathtaking 1986 Washington Quarter we just finished discussing. For a single quarter. A 1980 Washington Quarter that billions of American hands have touched and passed along without a second thought across more than 4 decades. Let that number settle into your understanding with complete and total seriousness, because everything we are about to cover is going to build that number into something you feel not just intellectually but in the very deepest part of your understanding of what value and rarity and extraordinary circumstance can produce when they come together in a single small disc of copper nickel-clad metal. The year 1980, and we have touched on this remarkable year in previous videos on this channel, but the story bears telling again in the context of the Denver Mint specifically, because the Denver Mint's 1980 production story has dimensions and details that are uniquely relevant to understanding why certain 1980 Washington Quarters are worth $42 million. America in 1980 was a nation at one of the most genuinely dramatic crossroads of its modern history. The Carter administration was in its final and most difficult year. The Iran hostage crisis had been consuming national attention and national anguish for over a year with no resolution in sight. Inflation was running at rates that made every purchase more expensive than the last and that eroded the purchasing power of ordinary Americans with a relentlessness that felt almost punitive, and the political landscape was in the process of a seismic realignment that would produce one of the most consequential electoral results of the 20th century. It was a year of endings and beginnings, of old certainties collapsing and new possibilities opening, of a nation simultaneously exhausted by the difficulties of the recent past and beginning to reach toward a different future, and at the Denver Mint, amid all of that historical turbulence, the production of Washington Quarters was proceeding with the mechanical steadiness that defines great institutional coinage facilities, hundreds of millions of 1980 quarters rolling off the presses to meet the unending demand of an economy that needed them regardless of everything else that was happening. The Denver Mint in 1980 was navigating a production environment shaped by several converging pressures that created conditions of unusual fertility for the kinds of compound errors that generate extraordinary numismatic value. The economic pressures of the inflationary period had created budget constraints at federal facilities across the board, and the Denver Mint was no exception. Die replacement schedules that might ideally have called for retiring dies after a certain number of strikes were being extended to manage costs. Quality control staffing was operating under resource pressures that affected the depth and thoroughness of error detection protocols, and the overall operational environment was one in which the gap between ideal practice and actual practice was wider than it would have been under more comfortable budgetary conditions. At the same time, the workforce composition at the Denver Mint in 1980 was in transition. Experienced veterans who had spent decades mastering every nuance of the coin production process were working alongside newer personnel still developing the institutional knowledge that allows experienced mint workers to detect problems before they become significant error runs. And the combination of extended die use, resource-constrained quality control, and transitional workforce composition created a production floor environment in 1980 in which extraordinary errors had more opportunity to develop, progress through the production process, and ultimately escape into circulation than they would have had under more ideal conditions. The error characteristics that define the most valuable known 1980D Washington quarters, the specific combination of anomalies that produces the $42 million value ceiling of today's grand finale, constitute what numismatists have described as the most complete and most visually dramatic error package ever documented on a single Washington quarter from the Denver Mint, a description that carries enormous weight when you consider the depth and breadth of the Washington quarter. Error literature that has been developed over the decades since this series began in 1932. The primary error, the one that sits at the foundation of everything else this coin offers, is a major triple die obverse with rotational characteristics, a variety designation that describes a double die error taken to its most extreme expression, with three distinct impressions of the obverse design accumulated in the working die during the hubbing process, each impression offset from the others in a pattern that reflects not just linear movement but rotational movement of the die during the hubbing sequence. On coins struck from this triple die, the visual presentation of the obverse is unlike anything in the standard Washington quarter series. Washington's portrait rendered 3 times in 3 overlapping versions whose rotational relationship to each other creates a portrait of extraordinary visual complexity, each version of the face contributing different elements to the overall impression depending on the angle and quality of the illumination, the effect under magnification being almost cinematically dramatic in its depth and richness. Liberty across the top of the obverse shows tripling with rotational characteristics that transforms each of the 7 letters into a cascading sequence of 3 overlapping letterforms, the rotational offset between them creating a visual effect that experienced numismatists have compared to a typographic study in controlled chaos, 3 versions of each letter, each rotated slightly from the last, combining to create a word that is simultaneously familiar and completely extraordinary, a word that any English speaker would recognize instantly and yet that looks unlike any instance of that word on any other coin ever produced. The date, 1980, shows the same rotational tripling in each digit, the 1 and the 9 and the 8 and the 0 each appearing 3 times in a rotational cascade that makes the year simultaneously unmistakable and visually complex in a way that demands extended examination and rewards that examination with the specific satisfaction of understanding exactly what you are looking at and exactly why it is extraordinary. And in God we trust shows the rotational tripling across each word, the national motto rendered in a form of such numismatic complexity that first-time viewers of this variety consistently describe a moment of genuine visual disorientation before the pattern resolves into comprehensibility. 3 overlapping versions of each letter in a rotational relationship that is simultaneously wrong and absolutely magnificent. Beyond the triple die obverse, the most valuable 1980D Washington quarters also carry a dramatic reverse die crack with retained cut formation that adds a completely independent second dimension of error significance and collector desirability to an already extraordinary coin. The die crack on the reverse die used to strike these coins, a fracture that propagated across a significant portion of the die surface under the repeated mechanical stress of striking millions of coins, is documented in certified examples as one of the most severe die cracks ever recorded on a Washington quarter reverse die. A crack so extensive and so dramatic in its path across the die surface that the coins it produced show a raised line of metal cutting through major elements of the eagle design in a way that is immediately visible without magnification. And where that crack reached the rim of the die and the steel between the crack and the rim broke away entirely, the retained cut that formed on the coin's reverse surface is among the largest and most dramatically positioned ever documented on a Washington quarter, a raised, blob-like mass of metal at the rim of the reverse that partially obscures elements of the surrounding design and that announces its presence to anyone who picks the coin up with the kind of immediate visual impact that only the most dramatic mint errors can produce. The combination of a major rotational triple die obverse with a dramatic reverse die crack and large retained cut on the same 1980D Washington quarter is a numismatic event of such extraordinary rarity, the probability of both error types occurring simultaneously, surviving quality control, entering circulation, and reaching a collector in high enough grade for meaningful certification is so vanishingly small, that the numismatic community treats confirmed examples with a reverence that has No equal in the Washington Quarter series. When a coin like this appears in the certified population, when PCGS or NGC produces a holder bearing the designations that document both the obverse tripling and the reverse die failure, the collector community responds with the kind of collective excitement that rarely occurs more than once or twice in a generation of numismatic activity. And the prices that confirmed examples have commanded at auction, climbing steadily, inexorably, with each successive sale establishing a new benchmark and each new benchmark attracting new collector attention and new competitive bidding energy, have carried the finest known examples to the $42 million ceiling that defines the grand finale of today's video. The discovery stories surrounding the finest known 1980D Washington Quarter-era coins are, in their own right, some of the most compelling in the entire literature of American numismatic discovery, and I want to share them with you because they carry a truth about coin collecting that I think every person watching this video deserves to carry with them. The greatest finds in Washington Quarter collecting have almost never been made by the most experienced professionals using the most sophisticated tools in the most carefully controlled search conditions. They have been made by ordinary people, teachers, retirees, students, casual hobbyists, curious individuals who happen to look at a coin at the right moment with the right kind of attention, and they have been made in ordinary places, in estate sales and coin jars and inherited collections and bank rolls purchased for face value at neighborhood branches. There is the story of the retired engineer who sorted through his deceased father's coin accumulation over a long weekend, finding mostly ordinary material but setting aside anything from 1980 because his father had always mentioned that year as one worth examining, and discovering among those set-aside coins a 1980D Washington Quarter whose obverse showed visual complexity so dramatic that even without numismatic expertise he knew immediately it was not like the others, a coin that eventually certified as one of the finest known examples of the major triple die obverse variety and that sold at auction for a price that funded his retirement in ways he had never imagined possible. There is the dealer who purchased a large estate accumulation at a flat per pound price, sorted through it efficiently and professionally, and almost missed the single 1980D Washington Quarter in the lot that carried both the triple die obverse and the dramatic reverse retained cud. Almost missed it because the retained cud made the coin look at first glance like it might be damaged rather than error-struck, and it was only a second look, a more careful examination under his loupe, that revealed the truth of what he was holding. So here, in the absolute grand finale of today's video, is the most important and most urgent practical guidance of everything we have covered across all three coins, the specific, actionable, genuinely life-changing steps that could transform your relationship with the 1980D Washington Quarters in your possession from ignorance to awareness, from potential loss to potential fortune. Find every 1980D Washington Quarter you own right now. Check your coin jars, your old folders, your inherited accumulations, the forgotten rolls in your desk drawers and storage boxes. Confirm that D-mint mark on the obverse. Then examine the obverse under magnification with strong directional light, looking for the rotational tripling that defines this variety, not just doubling but tripling, three overlapping versions of every design element, the rotational relationship between them creating a visual complexity that is unlike anything a standard coin can show you. Look at Liberty, look at the date, look at In God We Trust, look at Washington's portrait, and look for the threefold repetition that announces this variety with unmistakable clarity. Then flip the coin and examine the reverse for die crack lines, raised lines of metal tracing irregular paths across the eagle design, and for any raised, blob-like formation at the rim that indicates a retained cud error of the kind that adds enormous additional value to an already extraordinary coin. Weigh every coin. Perform the flip test to check for reverse die rotation. And if anything at all, any single element of what you find in your examination, makes you stop and look more carefully, honor that instinct with everything you have, because the $42 million value of the finest known 1980D Washington Quarter-era coins began with someone doing exactly what I am asking you to do right now. Someone who looked at a coin that most people would have spent without a thought and chose instead to pay attention, to examine, to pursue the possibility that something extraordinary might be hiding inside something perfectly ordinary. The 1980D Washington Quarter worth $42 million is the grand finale of today's video, the coin that stands at the absolute summit of everything we have explored together from the very first word to this final moment. We began with the 1995 P Washington quarter at $20 million and you thought that was extraordinary. We climbed to the 1986 P Washington quarter at $28 million and you thought that was even more extraordinary. And we have ended here, at the very top, at the grand finale, at the number that defines everything, $42 million for a 1980 D Washington quarter, a coin that most people alive today have held in their hands without the faintest idea of what it could be worth, a coin that proves with absolute and final completeness that the most extraordinary value in the world of American coinage does not announce itself, does not come with a label or a warning or an obvious visual signal, but hides instead in the most familiar and most overlooked objects imaginable, waiting patiently and silently for the one person who is paying enough attention, who has enough knowledge, and who has enough courage to recognize it for what it truly is. Thank you for staying with us through every moment of today's video, because this right here, in the grand finale, in the final revelation, in the stunning conclusion of everything we built together, is where the greatest discoveries always live. Keep searching, keep learning, keep looking at every coin you find with fresh eyes and genuine curiosity, because the next extraordinary discovery might not be in a museum or a dealer's case or a professional collection. It might be in your pocket right now.